Hello, welcome back to Out on the Line podcast. And yes, we have another review for you this week, folks. My name is Jeff, and I'm with my co-host Alex as always. Alex, how you doing this week?
Jeff's from Texas. I can tell by the way he's two-stepping around the room. But make no mistake, there's no half-stepping on this podcast. We go the full way, whole hog, baby. I'm excited to be here. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic, and we are going to do, I think, is this the first time we've done a full Muse album
This is the
on the
first time
pod?
we've done a full Muse.
I think we've definitely discussed them here and there during their little dalliance with the anti-woke crowd. So that I think that's pretty much the limit of any time you've heard about Muse on this podcast. But we are going to do the new album, The Wow Signal. Now this is, I believe it's my first time like really listening to a full Muse album. Obviously, I think most people are familiar with like Supermassive Black Hole, a couple other hits. So they've been a huge band for a long time. But this is the first time on this pod that we are diving deep into the world of Muse, of what's the guy's name? Matthew Bellamy.
Matt Bellamy.
Bellamy, and their weird instruments. And they are definitely a prog rock band. That I think they're like the prog's answer. What I always saw them as is like prog's answer to Imagine Dragons.
Oh, that is a spicy take. That is a haunt take.
Yes, I know. And for me, I think that opinion was changed by this album.
Well, I'm happy to hear that because the one that came before this. So in the lifespan of this podcast, I think the only ones we would have been able to cover, well, the only one actually, now that I look at it, we would have been able to cover is Will of the People, which came out like 2 years into the pandemic, 2022. And I think you and I were both put off our lunch because it was like a weird time. And we're like, this is just a weird, like the anti-mask stance wasn't like stated explicitly, but the music video was like people in masks trying to remove the individuality of some guy, and like the message of compliance. It whether or not that was intended, and I very much think it is, and Muse fans sound off in the comments like you couldn't be more wrong. I don't know why Muse fans are Southern, but it's at least the way that I took it, and I think you took it, is we're like we smell the anti-conformity, and we're not like pro like do everything the government tells you and blah blah blah. But at the time, it's like, why are we arguing against the mask?
Yeah.
It's like the simplest thing you can do. If they had a deleterious effect on your health, then it'd be a different story. But the fact of the matter is, it's like, just like, can you do it for now? If we all do it for now, we get over this. It just, maybe it's us. We didn't feel like it was the tyrannical overreach. Neither here nor there with like relitigating COVID politics in 2026, I guess. But I think at the time we were just kind of over the Van Morrisons and the Eric Claptons being like, the music industry's got to take a stand against tyranny. It's like, yeah, tyranny when it affects concert sales, like ticket sales. So I think that's why we passed over Will of the People. And also I think that lack of faith was rewarded because it was universally critically panned. Even Muse fans are like, what the fuck? So I gotta be honest, I was not really anticipating the wow signal. And usually I do listen to singles to whet my appetite. I didn't with this. I was like, I'll listen to it as a whole chunk and make my evaluation there, because I like the last like great album that I think they made was Black Holes and Revelations in 2006. The Resistance is good. The Second Law is decent. Drones is the last thing I liked. Simulation Theory, blah. Will of the People, didn't even listen. So I had like next to no expectations for this. And I got to say, much in the way that you were swayed away from like they're the prog Imagine Dragons, I found myself being like, this is like Muse at the peak of their powers. This is the best in like 20 years.
Yeah. And for me, I think maybe I probably listened to the Black Holes and Revelations album back then, but it's like, obviously it's been like 20 years since I really dove into them. What I did not expect on this album is I think I thought they were a lot more like proggy than they end up being. Now they definitely have prog elements, and there's definitely some, here and there some like different time signatures they might work with, and certainly subject matter I think is much more associated with what you'd consider like prog music to be. A lot of like space themes and stuff like that in here. But what I didn't really expect was them to get as heavy as they got on this album, and that spoke to me for sure. Specifically in The Sickness in You and I, like when you get towards the end of that song and they just kind of like take the rails off and just start getting like deep into it. There's a really good balance between songs like that and then songs like Be With You, which was a short little jaunt that definitely, I got some like later stage Coheed vibes from this, where, it used to be Coheed was very like, not quite hardcore, but definitely like pretty heavy as a band, and didn't have a lot of synth involved in anything. And then as the years went on, like more and more that kind of came into play, but they never lost that like touch of what their sound is. And I think with this, like, I think this sounded exactly like I expected Muse to sound, while still surprising me with how it sounded. The Dark Forest as the opening track, I think, is fantastic to kind of get you into this album. And there were really at no point did I find that I had like a lull in any of this. Lyrically, I don't know if Muse has ever been, certainly not Bob Dylan's Masters of War by any means, but I think it hits the notes it needs to hit to provide the context and like the storyline they're trying to provide for you. I think on moments like Be With You, there's a lot more of like an introspective sound, and those lyrics kind of match up with that. And then there's songs where it's just supposed to be heavy, and it's more about, I think, the feeling than it is about like the message they're trying to get across necessarily.
Oops, I muted myself. It's interesting because it's kind of a twofold, like, so the idea of the wow signal was based on this, like the wow signal was a radio signal in the 70s that suggested that there might be the existence of extraterrestrial life out there. And then the first song on this album, The Dark Forest, is a reference to the dark forest theory. A hypothesis, I'm reading this, a hypothesis states that no alien life has been found so far because advanced intelligent civilizations hide from each other to avoid annihilation. So you look at something like that, like a theory that's like directly tied to the Fermi paradox. How come we haven't found any aliens? Tying that in with what is, by Matt Bellamy's admission, a divorce album. He split from his wife and kind of wrote this, stopped touring to be there for his kids, and then kind of wrote this in that moment. And a divorce album, as we've talked about on the show, is a dicey thing. But the genius of it is that it was married with this concept of intelligent life out there that maybe we can't see, but we're convinced of, or we believe is there. Sort of the frustration of the unknowable, and this idea of hiding from one another to avoid annihilation. And there's parallels to that in a relationship. Like, what do you keep to yourself to avoid annihilating the relationship or avoid being emotionally annihilated? What is the other person? You can't know what they're up to because they're behind their walls. Even if you're like the most communicative people, how can you be 100% certain that there isn't more? And obviously there's like levels of trust within different relationships. And it seems like at the end of the day, Matt Bellamy's relationship wasn't going to hold up. But it really did, like, to me, the songwriting just feels way more inspired because of like how weird. Launch a pulse out into the abyss, reaching our hand to the lonely. Stars extinguish themselves out of fear, a beacon that can't light the darkness. Broadcasting reckless confessions, we all beg for extinction. Doom is our last invitation to soar here. So it is these big, almost like Neil Peart. Like Neil Peart was the one who wrote The Trees and all the like kind of crazy conceptual Rush songs. There's that sense of scale and grandeur in the lyrics that matches what's going on musically. And I was shocked by how much, like, the kinds of metal resources that were being put into this. Like, Muse has always been heavy, it's always been hard, but it's always been more to that, like, yeah, it's space rock, kind of cosmic sensibility. And that's very much intact here, obviously, considering what inspired the album in part. but like the metal guitars, the outro on this is on this not sorry, I switched from the Dark Forest to the Sickness in You and I. The
Mhm.
outro on the Sickness in You and I is, you put it up there with some of the heaviest metal out there. So
Mhm.
it feels like a return to form in terms of the operatic nature of this, in terms of the like connection to the lyrical content, having an emotional, authentic stake in it, and then adding this like new fusion of heavy metal into it. It really like takes the whole thing up to a new level.
Yeah, they really, I mean, I don't think it's ever been in question that Matt Bellamy and Muse in general are like very proficient musicians. I don't think that's ever been in question. I think they've always been looked at as kind of masters of their craft when it comes to that. But how much that translated to something that felt vital and really worth diving into outside of just kind of appreciating, I kind of, I guess I looked at it sort of like Steve Vai or like Eric Johnson, these guys that are these virtuoso guitar players, but it's like, how much are the songs that they're writing, like how much do those really connect with you? It's like you can appreciate the musicianship and the talent that it takes to make them, but it's like at a certain point there also has to be that kind of that undefinable it factor that brings you into these songs. And whether that's through songwriting or something interesting they're doing with the instruments, it can come in a lot of different ways. But I feel like Muse hasn't quite like nailed that for me in the past. Maybe on those previous albums, like when I was getting done with high school and getting into college. Um, yeah, dogs they're just very interested in what's going on with the neighborhood today. Um, but this album, I feel like there's several like shimmering scars. I feel like is a very angsty, like clever way to look at, like you would expect people like an emo kid on MySpace to like come up with that kind of line. So you think that's going to be corny, and then you listen to the song and you're like, there's a lot to why he wrote that song. You listen to Cryogen, another one that gets like kind of heavy, but and that of like synth side of things. There's just so many interesting things when you go like song by song on this album that any one of them you could pick out as a good representation of the album, but I feel like there was not a lot of like sameness throughout this album. It obviously all sounded like Muse, but everything had its own interesting kind of contribution to the album as a whole. And then I'll also point to specifically the song Hush with that they do with Ellie Goulding. Like I love the sound of her voice. I always have. I feel like I haven't heard about her in years, probably over a decade. Like I don't know that if she's remained relevant in her genre since then. Certainly nothing that I've heard of. But when I first listened through the album, and I don't really pay attention to song names or song titles or lyrics or anything, like I'm just getting a feel for it. Hearing that voice on there, I didn't realize it was her at first, but it sounded so good overall, and it sounded so perfect to how it like matched up with the rest of the album. As you're going through this album, and I think maybe my expectations were just low for what I was going to get out of this album, but the fact that I was so like pleasantly surprised by kind of everything throughout this album, it really spoke to, I think, maybe a new era for Muse, like maybe a new like version of them that still sounds like them but has a new vitality to it.
When you have to imagine, it's pretty invigorating to it's pretty uninvigorating, it's pretty discouraging to get trashed for something like Will of the People that lands with a thud to then come back with your best effort in, I mean, to me, again, 2 decades. It has to be encouraging, and especially because like I should say, when I'm like, oh, this is the Divorce album, it's not necessarily, I would say, like on its face exploring the way that like Jason Isbell, Foxes in the Snow, A Divorce and a New Relationship, or the dreaded Haley Williams album, or Star-Crossed by Casey Musgraves. Um, but I think the situation inspired the thematic, the matching thematic premise of like the darkness and what's out there. And then like really like following that literally and making this very cosmic, spacey, heavy album. And then yet there are these like wonderful like nuances from song to song. You get so like you start with the Dark Forest, the next song is Night Shift Superstar. And that is like a funky disco, something more in line with their song Supermassive Black Hole. Um it's groovy, it's weird, it's got like the children's chorus and the reverb. And at first I was so jarred by the transition that I was like, I don't know about this song. But once again, you go back through the album and I'm like, I really like this song quite a bit, actually. And it's just constantly, it was an album that was constantly keeping me guessing. And then, yeah, when you talk about um, doing Hush with Ellie Goulding, that just kind of came about. It was another classic tale of she was in the same studio. We invited her over and worked on the song with her, and it became a duet, and it meshes perfectly. Like she's always had that, "Show the lights that stop it."
Mhm.
The like ethereal quality of it really meshes with the space rock elements in Muse. So I think in many ways going back to their roots in a way that like Modest Mouse was not successful with in the album that we talked about not too long ago. Going back to their roots in a lot of ways, but then also like stretching themselves, adding an unexpected collaborator, and just like chasing the truth of what you're interested in. Like Drones, I like that album well enough, but it felt pretty manufactured and it was kind of ham-fisted in its message, doing like the Full Metal Jacket,
Mhm.
Starship Troopers type thing where it's like fascism. And I'm like, all right, I get it. This to me is more like subtle in it's playing to the themes, and it's doing so in a very plain way, and it's subtle in its emotions while speaking about them on a grand scale. It's a very cinematic album. I told a friend of the pod, Eric Luttrell, he played an original piece for me, and I told him it was very cinematic, and he says, "You're not the first person that said that. I don't know what that means. What makes a song cinematic?" And I really had to think about it. And I think it's something that immediately evokes imagery. For me, usually like a lot of strings. It has a big sound, it has a fullness to it.
Mhm.
It sounds like a full army there playing the music. And you get that all over this. Like it's big, it lands with a lot of importance. Excellent guitar work. They're all so tight together. It's clean as all fuck. The sound is just clean as a whistle. And again, some of the best lyric writing that I think has taken place on a Muse album in a long time. As some, I think I'm probably slightly more into them than you were. Again, I don't want to like
Yeah.
declare that if that's not true, but that's the sense that I'm getting. So it's not like I was sitting dead red being like, when's Muse going to make another great album?
Yeah.
I hadn't really given it much of a thought. I liked the shit I liked. I didn't like the stuff I didn't like. For this to then come around and like totally revitalize my interest. More of this, please.
Yeah, this, and I think lyrically, there's, I don't know how much digging up you need to do on like kind of understanding these things. I think a lot of it, there's some very like stream of consciousness sort of style writing with this, and then there's some things that you can clearly tell were specifically written about the situation that he's in with getting divorced and that like personal relationship. So there's not, I think maybe what the issue was previously is a lot of these like ambiguous ideas, like maybe they're talking about fascism and stuff like that, but if you're not super passionate about that, or if you haven't had like a real personal experience with it, it's hard to write a song in someone else's shoes if you haven't really worn them before. And I think with this, it sounds like there's a lot more of, a personal kind of like touch that's being put on these songs, that it's coming from a much more like personal place for him, where the lyrics are a lot more understandable in the context of kind of knowing what's going on maybe in his personal life, and using space and like the spaces between things, and the idea of the dark forest where it's like we're all part of the same thing but we're hiding from each other because it's could be dangerous if someone knows you're there, and using that as like a juxtaposition to how you might function in a relationship. I think there is a lot of very clever elements to how the album is put together, and I think there's a lot of honesty with it too. I think you have a song like the dark forest that has that kind of is taking a wider lens on things. Then you have a song like Be With You that is taking a much more like direct look and a much more like personal stake in kind of how these songs are getting written. And then you have a song like Hexagons where you're kind of reading through. It's like, I'm a marionette with severed strings, gorge on my throat, gorge on my soul while I'm weak and dying, haunted by futures I can't avoid, a shape immersed through the fog of war. It's like, it sounds fairly ambiguous, but it's again knowing what context that's written in that it helps it make a lot more sense.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you brought up hexagons, because for me it shoot, my thing just quit on me. For me, it exemplifies, I think, what makes this so interesting and so engaging, and why it makes it a successful album. So I'm looking at some of the Matt Bellamy behind the scenes stuff. I want to read two passages. Hexagons, I love, you know. I wanted to do a song that was experimenting with a 6/8/6/4 time signature, moving around different tempos, and also some cool, interesting guitar work. Achieved. Very deep, very progressive, very strange song, speaking about upper dimensions in space. It's one of my favorites. I'm intrigued by why hexagons appear in nature. You have the bee's honeycomb, you have the giant's causeway with all these kinds of hexagon shaped rocks. You have a giant hexagon storm on the top of Saturn. And I'm intrigued by this geometry or mathematics behind the universe. So there's parts of the album where we tried to incorporate some kind of universal geometry. That could sound like a bunch of like completely uninteresting gobbledygook, but that passion is translated into those lyrics that you read. I'm a marionette with severed strings, gorge on my soul while I'm weak and dying. I mean, like, it's, you wouldn't look at that and be like, it's a song about hexagons, but it's a song inspired by the geometry of hexagons as it occurs in nature, like drawing, like, it's not a straight line from his inspiration to what gets put on the final album, but it's him following his own logic, and you see it and you go with it, and it proves the point. Dan Harmon, creator of Community and Rick and Morty, once said, in terms of writing, you have to write about something you love, because if you're writing about something you hate or something you're not into, but particularly something you hate, we will know, the audience can tell, and it will not be compelling. You will not be compelled writing it. You will force it. The audience will not take to it. When you write about something you love, you can't help it. The passion comes flowing out. The ideas come flowing out. The creativity is obvious. And I think that's the difference between, again, the like singles we heard, like Compliance off of Will of the People. That felt like now's the time to make the important statement on fascism. Drones felt like it's time to make the important statement on fascism and conformity. And in many ways, my secret conspiracy is that that whole album was designed to create like the very highly interactive tour, where there were a lot of the same like marionette and control themes, and you know, that like the drones tour was a big thing. That to me rings far more hollow than everything that's on this, following the weirdness to an emotional core, and then doing like not only is it thematically weird and how the inspiration was arrived at, and then how like lyrics were put to it, but all the musical conventions, again, the shifting time signatures, the guitar work on it. It is very, very proggy and like different from any other song on the album. Like they give us a lot of different stuff while all giving it like one unity of sound. Obviously Matt Bellamy's voice, but there's a cohesion that is distinctly Muse, but they're giving us a lot of different stuff that just came from such an authentic spot.
Yeah, and they, I feel like you could take any one of these songs and it would be a good representation of the album as a whole, even though any one of those songs probably doesn't sound all that much like any of the other ones. I think that's such a good mark of a well-made album. And you know, maybe sometimes you hear of like somebody has a debut album and it's just amazing and then they never replicate that. The fact that Muse has been in this game for, you know, what, 25 years or something like that, and they at this point in their career they make hopefully what a lot of people will think is one of their best albums. Like how many other bands can say that, to be like this deep into things and not just be coasting on the goodwill you've built up through like previous work. I think to still remain as vital as they are, it means you're open to new ideas and you're open to like experimenting, figuring things out. And while Muse is always, I feel like, has always been associated with space rock, and that like Supermassive Black Hole is probably the most popular song, is obviously about something in space. Like they have a song on this album called Space Debris, which could absolutely be like one of the cheesiest things you've ever heard of. But in the chorus, like, orbit slow as our bond decays, like space debris, love can drift away. Like, obviously referencing his relationship, but using that in the theme of the album. And I think being able to do that, just one, it makes it make sense. So you lose the cheesiness because it does make the sense it needs to make. And you get a look at like kind of how resigned he is to, like, there's nothing that I could personally do about space, right? And there's probably nothing he feels like he could have done to save that relationship. So to equate those two things, I think is just a pretty clever bit of songwriting.
I agree. I think picking and choosing these moments to infuse that painful personal notion. So yeah, I have the space debris lyrics up, album ender. I can't fill the void when her heart ices over and light is destroyed. Connection is lost and the speakers hiss. I play it back when I forget what I miss. Orbit slow as our bond decays, like space debris, love can drift away. It's very simple. It's on theme with the space themes, but it's that, again, below the neck authenticity in terms of real experience and pouring pain into this. And, it's reflected on Cryogen as well, like a coldness, a loss of the orbit and stuff like that. So it's a great way to tie together themes, to tie together personal experience, and again, like giving us a very theatrical, very cinematic as we came in. It's the same we go out, floating away into the void as space debris. I think it's a very like thoughtfully constructed, intentional album, while also like to be that thoughtful and well constructed. It just clearly came from a place where it wasn't forced and it was allowed to come into view. I would say for me, this is a 9 out of 10.
For me, it's an 8 out of 10, which is certainly a lot higher of a score than I anticipated giving a Muse album, with my kind of limited experience in the past and kind of what I had thought of them in the past. I feel like I very much insulted them by saying they were the like prog Imagine Dragons. I feel like that since that was the impression I have, I think I do need to go back and listen to a lot more of their albums and see what I missed. Because if there's anything that's on the level of this, I think there's going to be a lot I find I enjoy.
Yeah, and I do think that like when you go back, it's like pockets of because again, Drones came out in 15 or 17 or something like that. Fine. It's fine. It's good. I enjoy it. I don't enjoy it to the level of something now like this, or Black Holes and Revelations. Like it's your journey might be a little fraught, but I think it'll be well worth it because at the end of the day, not a lot of people are making music like Muse. It's not like way out there conceptual, but it's very proggy for the mainstream. I see some of your Coheed parallels as well. I think you'll find some nuggets, but it can be a fraught journey along the way, I will warn. But the stuff that you're gonna like, you're gonna like.
Okay, well I'm very impressed with this album overall. So I will give the other things a chance, and with an ear that is probably going to be favorable to liking it after this album for sure.
Fantastic.
And I know we obviously did talk about our previous Muse experience on some earlier episodes. Where can folks find that if they're looking for it, Alex?
Well, I'll tell you what, you don't have to go to outer space. You don't have to travel into a black hole. You don't have to go to Venus. You don't have to travel to parts unknown. You don't have to meet a helpful Iridian by the name of Rocky, who communicates through musical tones and apparently has like steam for blood and stuff like that. You don't have to go on a cosmic journey with Ryan Gosling that may or may not result in your demise. All you have to do is go to youtube.com/C/out on that line. Folks, you talk about space. We have space to roam. We have coming up on 500 videos on there, years and years of content, so much for you to browse. It's just fantastic. I do believe one of our earliest reactions was me reacting to a Muse song. I think it was Won't Stand Down or Won't Back Down, which I think was off of Compliance, off of Will of the People. I just hated Compliance so much. I hate that song. So I think that's, it's precious little Muse content, but there's so much else out there. So much to really, tickle your whims, so to speak. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure that you click the bell so that you get notifications when we push another video into orbit. Make sure you hit the thumbs up to like the video. You can hype the video. You can share it with a friend. And also, you can leave a comment. The comments, they've been so good lately. We're addicted and we just want more. So join us out here amongst the cosmic debris. Yes, it can be a Muse reference. Yes, it can be a Frank Zappa reference. We can be a lot of things to you out here in the vast cosmic expanse that is the internet. YouTube.com/C/out on that line.
Folks, go do what the man says. Until next time.